Welcome back to the Transforming Basketball podcast. A good friend of mine, Jamie Smith, joining the podcast today. I had the pleasure to really get to know Jamie over the last year and a half. And we spent 10 days in Italy last year working together. Jamie came out to visit me, and we just had an incredible time on the court, applying many of the ideas we are so passionate about. So, Jamie, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to this. Looking forward to our conversation and the emergence of ideas. And my time in Italy, which we can talk about. It was an unbelievable experience. As a coach, as an educator. So I appreciate the opportunity then, and I appreciate the opportunity now.
Oh, thanks, man. So let's get straight into it. I've been creative, I've just been enamored with the creativity in many of your activities that you've been sharing over the years in the athletic performance realm. And a lot of what I see in the basketball world is, we talk about traditional approaches to basketball coaching. Well, we see the exact same things in athletic performance. For instance, movement routines for warm-ups, dynamic stretches, agility ladders, foam rolling, the same kind of things in the weight room. So, what's your vision, Jamie, for athletic performance of the future within the basketball world?
What I will say is we need to stop blindly following tradition. Just because I was a basketball athlete for many years, just because I personally did something 10, 15, 20 plus years ago, doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It means there's other tools out there. And so the big thing I had is that, so yes, we can do our stuff in the weight room. Yes, you can do your stuff in the warm up. Yes, you can do, your different conditioning drills. But I thought there was more to this. There's a better way to serve, in this example, basketball, but I have the pleasure of working with every sport you can think of. There's got to be more to than just getting stronger or getting faster or warming an athlete up. And so that's where, some of these creative small-sided games or some of these kind of unorthodox activities you won't see, in the traditional S&C setting. That's what that stems from. It's like, how can I better serve the individuals that are in front of me to truly prepare their body and mind for sport, for practice, for life. And so that's where, and we can discuss, that's where, a lot of these different theories and concepts underpin these ideas. It's just, I thought I could do more, instead of just living in the weight room. And it's like, all right, I got a kid's deadlift up, or I got an athlete's bench press up. That's great. But what does that mean? It's like, okay, the word strength, right? And I apologize for going on a tangent, but this word strength is a weight room term. I want to be able to take that strength and turn that into a more robust or a forceful individual, not just being like, all right, I got you from X amount of weight to, whatever, 10%, 20% increase. Okay, what does that mean? Because in my opinion, that's just one tool. And that doesn't correlate to a better basketball player, doesn't correlate to a better lacrosse athlete, whatever. And so I just thought there was more to this whole athletic puzzle. And so the stuff you will see, that like what we did in Italy, or the stuff in our workshop, those are the missing pieces. And that's where I think coaches, if they can just, take one of these ideas and start applying it, it's going to make a huge difference, and it makes sense. That's the great thing about this, is that when it kind of looks messy and chaotic and foreign, but when you understand the rationale and the reasoning, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. That makes actually a ton of sense.
I love that. So let's get to our workshop, which, we've just released on transformbball.com. And we released this because we wanted to show how we can integrate basketball with athletic performance, as opposed to these two fields existing in their independent silos, which is what we see at every level. But I'd say actually even the higher the level, the more, even more you see it. And that even, the greater the specialism, the greater the prevalence of these siloed departments. So, could you explain just to the listeners, Jamie, what we mean by that and why we think it's so important that, regardless of whether you're a high school coach or you're coaching in the NBA, we integrate these fields as opposed to working separately?
Absolutely. So the common thing you hear is stay in your lane. And so I got that a lot, especially early on when I was trying to share these ideas and trying to experiment and try to test out, a lot of these non-traditional activities. It was like, all right, stay in your lane. And I had the pleasure of working not only the private sector, but at the high collegiate level here in the States. And the strength and conditioning, the athletic performance, sport performance, whatever you want to call us, we're always the low guy or girl on the totem pole. And so what we are trying to do is we're trying to show that this is a collective synergy. This isn't one person is greater than another person. Everyone has their role, but these roles are interconnected. And me as an athletic performance coach, I need to appreciate what the athlete, what the movement, what are the common movements? What are the offensive and defensive tactics? Yeah. I need to understand the different nuances of basketball, of hockey, of you name the sport. I'm not saying I have to be, I have to have an understanding like the sport coach, but I need to have some awareness of what, not just from a physicality standpoint, from a biomotor ability. I need to understand, like I said, we have to understand, what are going to be the demands, physical, psychological, emotional, social, what are going to be the demands placed on, these, it could be kids, it could be whatever level you're talking about, but it's got to be more of this integrated approach. It's got to be this, we're on the same page, which you'll see in our workshop is that it should be a nice, smooth transition from, let's just say, okay, because this is tradition, right? You have the athletic performance coach. They do their things at the beginning of practice, and then the sport coach kind of takes over and does what they need to do, from a sports specificity standpoint. And what we're trying to show is that these can be integrated. And when we're looking at this from motor learning and motor performance, it can't be this siloed approach where there's no context, or the individual trying to learn how to name the skill, where it's like, okay, I'm in the four walls of the athletic performance world, but then when I leave that world, now I'm in the basketball world. Those things should just be one, that should be unified.
Yeah.
Right. And so we should be speaking the same language. We should be, communicating the same type of information. And so that's just the big thing, is showing how, I call it the bridge, where we're bridging, these speed skills, these force production skills, all these different ideas. We're trying to make it a seamless transition so that when the athlete, is performing their task from a basketball standpoint, let's say with an actual implement like a basketball, they have some contextual, they have some understanding of using some different types of movement solutions, or looking at different movement opportunities or affordances, where the traditional way, it's not a seamless transition. It's more of this stuff where it's robotic. It's more, everything's done a certain way, everything. But then the minute that the athlete enters the basketball world, everything acts, feels, behaves differently. And so all I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take some aspects, whether you want to call it representativeness or, adding I like using the word context, where I'm just giving them a feel. That's what we're trying to show. We're trying to show that it can be a nice transition from the general side of things to the specific side of things.
Absolutely. And I think when, a lot of athletic performance coaches, Jamie, have sent me messages over the last couple of years, and they're interested in the stuff I'm doing on the court. And then they're often, as immediately I send them like a link to your Twitter or whatever. And I think they're shocked that you can actually play small-sided games as part of athletic performance. And it's like a lot of coaches, especially when I was working in Italy, they had no clue that you could do things like that as part of athletic performance. They thought everything had to be, this closed environment, repeating movements. Then we go to the weight room, and it's just the complete opposite to what we're trying to get at here. And I think let's go back to the workshop, Jamie. I think what we've tried to do is, of course, it's going to appeal to basketball coaches, athletic performance coaches, and other practitioners. But even for some type of, a high school basketball coach, this stuff is easy to apply. You don't need to understand. You don't have to have a degree in athletic performance or strength and conditioning. It's super easy, right?
Absolutely. 100%. And that was the coolest thing for me, to be able to establish a distance relationship with you, then get the opportunity to take everything that I was, trying to create and apply in a very small, part of in Tingsboro, Massachusetts, the United States, and then be able to hop on a flight, come over, introduce myself, and then start integrating and start applying these ideas in a completely foreign setting. And yes, was there a transition period? 100%. But after day one, it was just really powerful to see that we don't need these, traditional fancy gadgets and pieces of equipment and tools, where if you understand movement, you understand sport, you understand learning, and then you look at the individuals in front of you as human beings, it's limitless. It really is limitless with all of these different ideas that you can do. But the big thing is that the engagement, the shit, the production, just the engagement. It's just because I see it, right? And so that's why I'm sharing all these ideas, whether I'm working with a 6-year-old or I'm working with a 30-year-old, I'm seeing this, in real time. And I want to share it, and I want to be able to apply this with all these different levels, and getting that chance to do that with, with your organization. It was really powerful. And it's like, okay, you see these small-sided games, you see some of these plyometric environments, you see some of these, kind of speed experiences. And again, I'm not saying tradition is invaluable. I'm not saying that we don't lift weights. I'm not saying we don't do closed environments. I'm just not limiting myself to just that, where I'm exposing, using these different tools and these different pieces to the puzzle, where now it's like, all right, now I can make this we can create this larger puzzle, where now this athlete or this individual that's in front of me is going to have more options. And that's just the biggest thing, because I'm sure you see this too, where, everything is pre-planned, everything you're told what to do, everything, is very rehearsed. And the minute they get into a situation where it's not rehearsed, it is uncertain, it is chaotic, which that's sport, that's basketball, they don't have access to that. And so all I'm trying to do is just give them the tools where, just in case, if they need to get access to, you name the skill, you name the situation, that's what my process is about. Is I'm opening up, this movement toolbox. I'm expanding this affordance landscape, where now they just have more options. And so if you as a coach want to change your defensive scheme, or you want to change the way you run your offense, or whatever it may be, your kids aren't going to be limited to just doing it one way. They're going to have the availability of all of these different movement options to be adaptable, to be robust, to be resilient. And that is the purpose, right? It's not just strength and speed. It's actually getting these skills to be able to transfer or transcend past, training environments.
Absolutely. So I want to shift the focus now, Jamie, to some of the kind of practical considerations as to what a constraint-set approach within the athletic performance world kind of looks like for basketball. And, this is very much kind of a sample of what we've done in the workshop. So I think the easiest place to start is to warm up. And I know we're both very similar in this regard, where we believe that traditional warm-ups are just, wasting time. And it's really just not conducive to developing more skilled basketball players. So as opposed to these routines, what could a coach to be doing at any level from NBA to high school to prepare their players better within the warm-up?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been on several podcasts and a lot of things on social media. It talks about, me eliminating the dynamic warm-up. What I am saying, I'm saying there is a warm-up. All right. There is I call it pre-training, pre-practice. There is a warm-up element. All I am saying is that instead of doing your warm-up lines where you have kids, you have everything pre-planned, they do the same 8 to 10 movements, it's on the whistle or it's on one of the leaders of the team. All I'm saying is that instead of focusing on just kind of getting through it, let's look at that 5 to 10 minute period as a learning window, as an opportunity to improve. And so kind of performing, and I've done it and I've gone through it where we're kind of doing the same thing over and over again. And there's a lot of traditional coaches that will say that that's what the athletes need. I would argue where it's all right, if they're going to be thrown into, practice, into a sport specific, high information, high problem solving situation, let's make sure we're really preparing them. Let's just not look through a physical lens. Let's also look, through a psychological lens. And so the big thing is this idea of tapping into that kind of perceptual motor landscape, or this idea of perception action coupling, and understanding that the information around them, that's what we want to exploit. We want to maximize. We want to take advantage, and it's not going to be something where the first thing in practice, I'm throwing them into a 5v5 small-sided game, but let's get them into a simple 1v1 situation, and depending on the session, depending on what the emphasis is, or I follow a low-high model where basically there's easy days and hard days. Let's just keep it simple like that. Where on the easy days, it could be a simple 1v1, some sort of game, whether it's a tag type thing, whether it's some sort of evasion, invasion, but some sort of game that we're putting one individual in an offensive role, another individual in a defensive role, where we're tapping in. Yes, we're connecting the perception action coupling, but we also have the behavior side of things. We have the intentions where and to keep it simple on the podcast, offense, you're trying to create space. Defense, you're trying to close down space. And so tag is a very simple way to, to give kind of somewhat of a visual understanding of a simple 1v1 game. But in our workshop, in my ebooks and everything I share, I have hundreds and hundreds of examples of these kind of 1v1 situations where, you can play around with different spacing. You can play around with inside that space, are there obstacles? Is it open? And all of these different constraints, all right, which we talk about in our workshop, are going to influence these movement behaviors, are going to influence what, the type of movement patterns, are going to potentially emerge. And so say on an easy day, it's more game where we're focusing on a 1v1, which is an individual focus. But on the flip side, I also have team games where maybe we do a 2v2, maybe we do a 3v3, where maybe we're implementing a ball in a bin. It's still in a game-like environment where we're not, as a coach, we're not trying to micromanage everything. We're not trying to force the athletes into predictable patterns, but it's about fun. It's about interacting with teammates. It's about solving, the problem as a collective. But then on the hard days, all right, that's where we can get into more of I call them pre-training 1v1s, where maybe we're focusing on deceleration. All right, there's going to be more of a specific focus. Again, I'm not forcing it, and I'm allowing some fluctuations. I'm allowing for these movement problems to emerge and be authentic. But maybe it's a focus on deceleration and working on some concepts from a deceleration or a stopping perspective in this 1v1 environment. So it's a little bit more directed. Or maybe it's more where I want to get that speed opportunity, where we're going to be focusing on acceleration patterns, or maybe that kind of curved speed pattern. So that would be something on more of a hard session, or what I call, a high CNS day. And so it's kind of getting away from everything being closed, pre-planned, robotic into okay, we're going to get these small-sided games. All right, we're going to start to create, we're going to give a feel. So the movement problems are going to feel, behave, act very similar to what they're going to do in sport, but we're going to manage that information. All right, is it a 1v1? Is it small spacing? All right, are we going to focus on the cognitive side? All right, especially with the youth. All right, and I guess you could say the same thing as as you kind of climb the ranks into the professional level. I don't see this. I don't see a focus on decision making. Where that's absolutely vital to sporting performance. All right, and success on a basketball court is being able to make quick and effective decisions, being able to anticipate, being able to recognize different patterns and trends. And so performing these small-sided games, whether it's more in a gameplay scenario or whether it's more directed in problem-solving environments or my pre-training 1v1s, that's where, going against another human being is going to provide way more opportunities for learning compared to just going to a static cone or stepping inside a small box like the agility ladder. And so it's just changing our view of, okay, and you see this, right? The sport coach will be, all right, everyone line up, and then they'll take their strength and conditioning coach. He's got a whistle, and everyone just kind of does the same thing. And then the strength and conditioning coach steps off, the basketball coach comes on, and we got to make this more of an, it's got to be more of a collective process, and it's got to be more of this unified approach.
So I want to talk about that, Jamie, and you just kind of hinted at what we see in environments all over the world. So what could a basketball coach be doing as you're leading your athletic performance coaches, as opposed to just sitting on the side or maybe going to high five some players? And then the same thing as maybe like in Italy, when I was running practices, you were actually very active. You were making observations. You were looking at how the athletes were interacting within their affordance landscape. And then you were thinking, all right, maybe the next small-sided game after this might adapt it. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it has to, so there has to be preparation, right? There has to be, and you'll see this, you'll see coaches have their meetings, you'll see, briefs and debriefs, etc. As a sport performance or as an athletic performance coach, I just think we need to be asking different questions. I think we need to change our lens instead of just, like I said, having that physical lens, whether it's through the powerlifting world, whether it's through the Olympic weightlifting world. And again, I'm not saying there isn't value there, because there is, but it's one tool. And so I just think there needs to be that communication before and after, but also during. And I think while that practice is happening, like that's where having that communication, having that open mind and understanding, that's where all of these ideas come from. And the beauty of what I'm trying to share and you're trying to share is this can be adapted for any situation. And so many of my ideas come from in the moment of seeing, what is actually happening, during my actual training sessions or during an actual sporting practice. And that's where you're going to create these activities. That's where you're going to start to get some of these ideas and be okay with, kind of going off script, so to speak. There's so many coaches where they'll have their printout, right? Or they'll have their perfect Excel spreadsheet. And it's like, nope, we are sticking to it. Instead of having objectives, having principles, having, an overarching emphasis, but being okay with whatever the means are. So whatever the exercises, the movements, the activities, the practice situations, being okay to make changes, in the moment. And I think having that interaction and asking the right questions and having an open mind, that's what it should be about. And so that's where so many of the things, because I am not in the player's shoes, right? You're not in the player's shoes, and kind of seeing what are the behaviors, what are the patterns, what are emerging. And because you can have an idea and it could be completely, it could be an awful, it could be completely, I don't want to use profanity, but it could have gone a completely different direction. And so being all right, where it's like, hey, and that's a big thing with this is being transparent, right? Having that trust and having that communication with the athletes, being like, all right, we need to go off script, but being okay with that, being okay with making changes in the moment. So the big thing is just not kind of, all right, I'm the role as the sport, that athletic performance coach. You're the role as a sport, as the basketball coach. And that's it. It's like, you better have an understanding. You better have an appreciation. And that's on both sides.
It is. So, undoubtedly a big part of athletic performance at all levels is the weight room. And we've covered some of the on-court stuff. And obviously we both very much believe that we can't just be doing athletic performance things in the weight room. There's so much benefit to getting on court, getting outside on the grass, using different surfaces and creating these small set of game environments to allow players to, expand their movement solutions, which will enable them to be more skillful in a basketball setting. But obviously the weight room, it still exists and it's still useful. And we speak about how we still both believe in weightlifting, and we're not saying not to do it. However, what we're saying is it's a problem when, the majority of a basketball player's kind of athletic performance is, heavy lifts. And when we've spoken a lot about the ability of a player to become skillful is, being able to navigate their affordance landscape and being able to act on attractive affordances. But if we're just doing these heavy weights, actually what we don't realize is we're actually making it harder for a player to maybe act on some of these affordances, because yes, they're going to be stronger, but we're really making, problems in terms of we're not reducing muscle slack, but we're increasing it. So it's going to be harder for them to actually accelerate, move quickly. Could you speak a little bit about that, maybe, Jamie?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's where, all right. And my business is called the U Strength, right? So I still believe in resistance training. I think there's a ton of value, in lifting weights. But like I said earlier, it's one tool. And so instead of looking as the only way to get stronger is by lifting weights, I use different terminology where it's force, right? And so we have force potential, but we also have force expression. Think of force potential is the force production strategy. So that's your traditional concentric base where you're squatting, you're going down and up, and you're using a barbell. But you also have force transmission. So that ability to take that energy in and be able to use that, in a more dynamic way. So think of like plyometrics. But then you also have force acceptance, where it's teaching how to yield, how to take that energy in to then be able to produce or transmit it. And so that's different. I call it, that's our different depth drops. So you're basically standing on an elevated surface, you step off, you stick the landing. There's so many different variations, so many different tools with that. But all I'm trying to get at is that there are so many different ways to get an athlete stronger. But we need to look at it, instead of looking at it from a strength training standpoint, let's look at it from a force development. Because you have the potential side, like I just discussed, but you also have the force expression. And that's where we need to be able to display force production, all right? But we need to do it in a skillful way where we need to appreciate time constraints. We need to appreciate that we do not have an unlimited amount of time, let's say like a power lifter, right? Where they have time to go down and go up. As long as they perform a squat and they break parallel or go to parallel and they stand up, there is no time limit. All right. And so, but in basketball or in any type of team sport, there are time constraints. There are limitations where you don't. All right. You need to have that ability, or you need to have that opportunity to be able to whatever, first step, having effectiveness with your first step, being able to have that, vertical output, being able to move laterally, whatever. There's so many different situations, but instead of looking at it from a strength training perspective, let's look at force development, because then that's going to open up some different options for you, from a force potential, which is still important because we still need to have access to these physical tools. But we need to tap into the force expression, which you will see small-sided games. You will see that in how I use my medicine ball throws, how I use some of these plyometric environments. But it's looking at it from a force development standpoint, which is more practical than just looking at it from a strength training perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the last part of this is the practical application of how you're actually doing this. And I think what I loved is just how creative you were in the weight room, applying the concept of repetition without repetition. Just as I talk about from a basketball perspective, you're doing that in the weight room too. And, from what I saw, it could be, what you did with our guys, getting them in different stances, changing grip positions, different velocities, different shapes, I think, as you call it. Could you speak a little bit more about that, please, Jamie?
Yeah. So this idea of rep without rep, right? This is a dynamical systems theory where we're looking, we are, systems upon systems, right? The human body is complex. All right. We are creative, adaptive organisms. And so looking at as the weight room, as again, instead, like we talked about with the dynamic warm up, the weight room is also an opportunity for learning, right? And it's not just learning from a technical aspect of becoming a better squatter, but I look at the weight room as just, again, putting more tools. Because one thing I notice, especially in today's landscape, where early specialization, where kids are playing one sport year round, there's no in season or off season, it's just go, 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 go. Individuals are very comfortable with the same 2-3 movement solutions. They're very comfortable creating the same shapes, the same techniques. And so this idea of rep without rep is allowing and encouraging, right, the athlete to explore, all right, different positions, which I call shapes, different force vectors, so how they're interacting with the ground, different velocities, whether it's from a concentric standing up standpoint, whether it's from an eccentric or a yielding where they have to come down, whether it's the length of an isometric where they're holding specific positions and they're playing around with the location of that position or the duration of that position. But the big thing here is it isn't random, right? So if I have a younger athlete, and maybe we real simple, maybe I give them 3 options. Maybe they're doing a goblet squat pattern, or maybe they're doing a deadlift pattern. But instead of it just having them do it one perfect way, I teach them some basic concepts like creating a flat back shape or appreciating the tripod and keeping a flat foot on the ground. But I might have them do 3 different stances. I might have them every rep as they're performing, this goblet squat pattern. I might just have them change their stance, change their base of support where they're learning. It's a new problem each rep but it's not just random. It's not just, okay, do whatever you want to do. I'm having them go wide, medium, narrow, and they have a new problem each time to try to solve with this goblet squat pattern. But then we can take this to a higher level athlete, right? And so maybe I have an individual performing a bench press where we're focusing on isometric positions where they need to hold during their warm-up sets where the weight isn't super heavy, so it's submaximal. But as they're warming up, or I call them our prep sets, each rep, they need to hold that isometric at a different position where they need to be able to generate enough force to, again, appreciate some principles and concepts with the bench press pattern. And they have to generate enough force to respect those. But instead of telling them, okay, you can only pause on your chest, all right, you have the full up, down, and anywhere in between to kind of pause. So those are real basic examples. Again, I try to share a lot of these rep without rep ideas, whether it's at the whether it's with our youngest level, which I call our fundamentals level, or, whether it's with our highest level or our peak group. It's learning, and it's not random. There is strategy behind it, and it's very useful. And again, if we're looking at it from giving them more tools instead of them just trying to master the squat pattern or master the bench press pattern, we want them to be able to take these tools or take these skills in the weight room and be able to apply that, in a more skillful manner. And so that's where the rep without rep is such a great idea. And again, it's not like I do this every time. There's a time and place for everything, but it's a great way, again, to allow the individual to take ownership all right, to create new problems, to learn how to solve those problems, all right, and then be able to take that and then be able to apply the same thing in a more skillful manner. And that's where I see rep without rep as such a beneficial tool for the athletic performance world, because that's when we can start again to expand this movement toolbox.
So, Jamie, I think one of the biggest things we hear is how athletic performance is so important for quote unquote injury prevention. But that's probably a misnomer because we can't prevent injuries. But we both believe that through a CLA, we can reduce them. And I think a lot of people, maybe when they first hear about what we're doing, they think, oh, well, we're increasing the risk to the athletes because they're playing live more in, these environments. There's probably more load. But we both believe that obviously if you're doing this right and you're doing this in the most effective dosages, that this can actually have the opposite effect because we're actually exposing players to what they're going to see in the game. So, do you think that there are big implications for injury reduction using these ideas and applying a repetition without repetition approach as opposed to repetition after repetition, as we see right now within the basketball world?
Yes. And I think that that's what one of the biggest changes, over the last 5 to 10 years. When I first got into the industry, variability was bad. Mm-hmm. And there was always some sort of negativity, placed on variability. But that's not the case. And that's not what I'm seeing. Variability helps with injury reducing adaptability. And so you're allowing the different systems to work together. Like we're talking about as from a coaching and organizational staff, it's the same thing with our body. And we're allowing all of these different systems to work together to help take on the stressors of our small-sided games, the stressors of the weight room, the stressors of, the academic life, the stressors, you name it. But we're using all of these systems to work together instead of in isolation. And then the other big thing is that the variability has always I want to be careful with how I say this, Alex. It's always been when you do too much of different things, it's always, especially in the strength and conditioning world, it always leads to, how can I say this?
Don't worry.
Yeah. So the big thing, sorry for the pause, because I want to be very careful, because there's, when we talk about these ideas, the athletic performance world, they're so close to tradition. They're so close to all these ideas. And all we're trying to do is to show there's just another way to do it. And the big thing with the variability is that it's all, like you said, it's about the dosage, right? And so I follow a very, very low volume approach. And so that might sound very, very foreign to, the traditional coach, but there might be situations where the athlete has one set, the athlete has one rep, where we have this idea of quality versus quantity, this idea of minimal effective dose, which, yes, because we have all these different aspects, all right, it's very, very difficult to measure everything. But I monitor moods. We have, subjective and objective data that we use to kind of monitor session to session. But I'm always looking to create, when we're looking from a workload standpoint, I want to do the least amount of work to elicit a positive adaptation, whether that's jumping higher, whether that's solving a 1v1 problem in a different manner. The minimal effective dose is something that when we're doing all these different environments, this isn't something where, we're spending 3 hours doing it. They honestly might be spending 4 to 6 minutes. They might have one opportunity. They might have one top work set, whatever it may be. So it's just variability. All right. Is so important, from an injury reducing standpoint, but then also appreciating the workload, the volumes. All right. And kind of having this minimal effective dose or quality over quantity is just, it's been such a huge aspect to applying these ideas.
Great stuff. So coaches, to really look at how everything that Jamie and I have spoken about today can be brought to life, well, head to transformingpeople.com and you'll see one of our workshops. It's right there. And, we've got just numerous examples of how we're applying a constraint-set approach, not just, on the court, but also in athletic performance and, transcending that, showing actually how we're integrating it. And that's one of the biggest messages. It's not just the small-sided games, which of course are great alone, but it's talking about the methodology behind it, why we are doing these things, and critically how we're actually integrating and how we're bouncing off each other in both fields. So Jamie, thanks again for joining the podcast, and obviously really excited to keep doing more through both our companies, the U of Strength and Transforming Basketball.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited to see what the future has for us.